We're now going to talk about something pretty disturbing. A report came out about a busted plot by an individual who happens to be a former Marine. I don't think this is at all supposed to be a message about anti-Marine stuff. This is just someone who happened to be a Marine who has a horrible ideology, and to the Marines' credit, they did kick him out or remove him from the Marines based on this ideology, from what I understand. But this individual had such horrible racist ideas and beliefs, and a social group that confirmed and bolstered those beliefs that he was planning on shooting up a synagogue or attacking a synagogue, and had a lot of other racist, murdering, raping fantasies that he wanted to carry out. To the FBI's credit, they busted it. They prevented what was going to happen, which is a really good thing. Let's go ahead and take a look. Reading from NBC, a former Marine is accused of leading a neo-Nazi group that was allegedly planning on an attack on a New York synagogue. Matthew Bellinger is charged with gun charges and could spend up to 20 years in prison if convicted, according to court documents. Of course, we're waiting on this to go through the courts, so in that sense, it's not 100% confirmed, but this is what has been revealed from the FBI. The FBI began investigating Bellinger, I might be pronouncing that wrong, because they suspected he was planning to harm people and destroy property in hate-motivated attacks, according to court documents filed this month. Quote, the investigation was grounded in evidence that defendant was using social media to conspire with others, including members of a group called Rape Krieg. Rape Krieg is the name of the organization, to commit hate crimes, the document said. Listen, this is just horrible stuff. The group, based on Long Island, so this is a racist group, had procured weapons, uniforms, and tactical gear and discussed committing attacks on a synagogue, Jewish persons, women, and minorities, including the rape of enemies to injure, oppress, threaten, and intimidate, and the rape of white women to increase the population of white children in furtherance of Rape Krieg's goal of creating a white ethno-state through accelerationist means. So we'll continue on in a second here, but this is an ideology that's growing, actually. Obviously, you think about the KKK, okay? A time in American history where there was this very popular social group that was centered around a hate for people based on their race. And we think about that type of group interactions on the decline in the United States typically. But there's actually this resurgence in recent years of people joining up groups and adopting these ideologies that truly believe that other people are less than them because they are of a different race or a different gender. And even to the point where you hear in online spaces, if you're someone who consumes a lot of political content online, a massive growth of these online right-wing figures. And I just want to be clear, because I always want to be nuanced in my discussions around this. This is a very, very far right group. Plenty of people who consider themselves conservative, even very right wing, don't subscribe to this. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a very, very, very far right strand of the more general right. Okay. But you'll see these right wing figures online who literally advocate for ethno-states, who advocate that white people need to be protecting their own and trying to grow their own population, and that's why immigration's bad, and all of these things. This is on the rise right now, especially in online circles, and other people would have to speak to other circles, but those are the ones that I'm aware of the most. And so the reason I'm covering this story is because it's so important that we recognize these harmful ideologies, and then obviously the FBI in this case prevented this particular attack and these individuals, but recognizing the larger pattern that we're seeing of people who hold these horrible, hateful ideologies and trying to address that, trying to figure out how we can prevent people from being radicalized into that. Super important to prevent harm, of course. So let's continue reading. Other members of the group identified Bellinger as a leader and administrator of the group who had written, they spell it differently in this article. It's Rape Krieg right here and then spelled differently here, but in that group's manifesto. Quote, rape, for example, is an extremely effective tool. This is from their manifesto. An extremely effective tool against our many foes, as its verbal use as a threat or direct use against an individual greatly reduces enemy morale and strikes a nameless fear in their hearts. Read part of the manifesto according to court documents. While this is especially effective against females, the emasculated cesspool of progressive males is just as effective, being inherently effeminate themselves. So you can hear so many of these talking points that are now becoming way too popular in this super far right space, where they talk constantly about how, liberal ideology is making people more effeminate. And because of that, in this case scenario, they're talking about rape for those individuals. And then in many cases, they have this obsession with using the violent action of raping someone as some sort of attack on an enemy of theirs to strike fear into their hearts. Disgusting, disgusting stuff. One more horrible detail from this, again, outlining the ideology that is leading this group to wanting to attack a synagogue. Quote, if you have any doubts, this is... Oh my goodness. Okay. This is horrifying. If you have any doubts about being able to pull the trigger on a Jewish child, then you are not mentally prepared for the level of violence that the first world collapses will bring. To be successful in this battle for survival, the white man must learn to hate, seeing red the moment he lays his eyes on a member of the race that he has inflicted unspeakable horrors onto his people. Okay. So we're going to stop there. There's a lot more. You can look into it yourself, but just recognizing that this ideology exists in America is prevalent enough where people are able to build social groups around it. And again, credit to the FBI for busting this whole plan up, preventing it from happening. But it's super scary because even though more prominent right-wing figures don't use this specific of language, and I don't even think they necessarily have this horrible of ambitions, they do perpetuate the idea that, hey, you should take pride in being a white person, and you should look out for your own, and you should care about the white people being a smaller percentage of the United States than they were in previous generations, and all these things. That is harmful, because that should not be how we're dividing ourselves up at all. We should not be trying to pit ourselves against one another based on the color of our skin. As simple of a concept as that is, clearly it's super difficult for people to truly buy into that idea that we are all individual, we're all valuable, we all should have the ability to connect with one another and love one another, and not do so based on each other's race. So horrible stuff. It's an ideology that needs to be completely outcasted from society, and clearly we're not doing a good enough job of that right now. And I think part of that comes down to, how do we catch people before they get there? How do we prevent the radicalization to that super far right ideology? And that starts with really being critical of the more prominent right-wing figures who aren't perpetuating that, but they are kind of perpetuating this fear of you being replaced by non-white people, and no, white population's going down, and that's bad. And that needs to be heavily criticized, because it's what leads people to eventually getting to this type of ideology. To be clear, it's perfectly fine. I'm going to disagree with you if you have like irrational fears about, oh, there's too much immigration, blah, blah, blah. If it's genuinely that, because you think, incorrectly that causes a massive level of unemployment, if it causes them to take your jobs and stuff like that, we can talk about that. And that's not what I'm saying. You can have genuine critiques of our immigration system. You can believe there's too much of it. All of those things are not what I'm speaking to. I'm speaking to people who use the conversation of immigration to say it's bad because it's replacing white people. It's bad because the white population is now proportionally less in the United States than it used to be. That's what I'm criticizing, and that's what I think leads to this. A healthy, even if incorrect, critique or issue with the way that immigration currently goes is not what I'm speaking to right now. I want to be clear on that. I'm not saying you can't criticize the level of immigration we have now without being called this guy. Of course not. But people are going farther than that, and they are trying to attach it to being white, and that's what's threatened, is the white people, and that cannot be accepted.